And thank you very much for coming along to tonight's Stronger Families session. My name's Darryl from Four Pillars, as Donna was telling you there, and I'm an associate trainer with the charity, and that means that what I do is I deliver training sessions like this to groups like yourself, businesses, organisations, on this subject matter and others. LGBT awareness. With regards to how the session is going to work, I've got our agenda here. So we're going to start out by talking about, this whole session is orientated towards thinking about, I understand that we're largely parents or guardians here, and largely we're going to be thinking about interacting with young people who may or may not be LGBT plus, and how to kind of make space for them to tell you and them to let you know where they are with that, and how to kind of make that process as easy as it can be for a young person to kind of figure out where they sit. And that's a process that everybody goes through, regardless of what the end result is. It's just that some people's processes might appear more obvious than others, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail as we go through the session. What I would say from like a logistical point of view, if you've got questions as we go along, please do, as Donna mentioned, use the Q&A function, type it in, and DJ's here, he's keeping an eye on that, and if it's a question that we feel like he thinks would be really good to get answered at that point in time, he'll put that to me, and we'll get it answered there and then. Otherwise, we'll come to the questions at the end of the presented section. And if you've got a question and you're thinking, right, I don't want to ask that while the recording's on, what we'll do is for the Q&A section at the end, we'll stop the recording and people can feel free at that point to ask any questions that they may have that they maybe didn't want to go onto the recording. So you'll have those sort of, as I say, ask questions as and when they come, or please feel free to wait until the end. So yeah, we'll look, as I say, at starting a conversation, first of all, about gender identity and sexuality with a young person, then answering questions. So how do we respond once we get into that conversation? And we'll look at some techniques to help be a source of support for LGBT plus young people. Talk about language. A quick fire introduction to some key terms that you might hear young people using in relation to gender identity and sexuality. And then how can an LGBT plus charity help? And at that point, I'll go into more detail about what the services are that Four Pillars offers. And then, as I've mentioned, there'll be a chance to ask questions at the end. So, just what are the goals, just so that we can be really clear about what we're aiming to get out of this session. First goal is to feel confident initiating an open conversation about gender identity and sexuality, because it can be something that we can be quite nervous to approach, right? I don't want to say the wrong thing, don't want to upset anybody. So how can we feel confident and comfortable initiating that conversation? Then we'll be thinking about getting comfortable answering questions that young LGBT plus people may ask. Again, that can be something that sparks a bit of nervousness. We don't want to give incorrect information. None of us are experts on all different kinds of experiences. So how do we answer questions when we're not sure of what the answers are? We'll get introduced to some relevant language, and we'll have an awareness of the support services that are in place. So you'll see that those goals kind of map onto each of the sections that I outlined in our agenda a moment ago. So let's look at the first of our items on the agenda then, starting a conversation. How do we start a conversation about gender identity or sexuality with a young person? Well, a first top tip that I would have for this is leave our definitions of normal at the door, right? we probably all have, whether it's something we've thought much about or not, we probably all have a rough idea in our head of things that we might consider to be normal. And often that might sort of, that isn't necessarily about what is normal for everybody, but that's probably what's been normal for us, or what's been something that we've encountered a lot of in our own experiences with our own set of friends, with our own family, within our own social groups at work, and for especially across generations. So when you're speaking to your kid, or to your kid's friends, or kids that you're engaging with in any other capacity, their sense of what's normal is probably going to be completely different, and they might have totally different language for it. And so personally, an approach that I really, really encourage, and is for, just to kind of abandon this idea of normal, and to kind of, rather than thinking of our own experiences as normal, or, thinking of another set of experiences as unusual, we can just kind of put everything on a level playing field and think about, okay, that isn't how it was for me, but that's just as valid, just as normal as my own experiences. And this mindset, more than anything else that I talk about today, I think is like the number one thing that you can maybe take away from this session. And you'll see me, I'll be coming back to this idea as we go along, because what happens is, when we start to call some experiences normal and other experiences unusual, that might not sound like a kind of a compliment or an insult on the surface, but it is making generally, to be normal is easier than to be unusual. And particularly LGBT plus people are very used to often being sort of unusual, or the first or the only person in the room, who feels that way. So that doesn't really help to describe things in those terms. So that would be my first tip. Young people will have their own experiences of gender identity and sexuality, and these are very likely not to map onto yours. Even a young person who identifies as heterosexual, if you also identify as heterosexual or straight, your two experiences of that and your two understandings of that might be different again. So, it's really just, as I say, about making space for other people to let you know what their experiences are. So, yeah, before we begin a conversation with a young person, I think we want to think about, do I think that my gender identity or sexuality is normal? And if I do, just, maybe challenge that belief in yourself, or try to suspend that, or park that before you go into that conversation with a child. Because if they say something and they get a sense from you right away that you think that's quite weird or unusual, they're probably going to shut down and not tell you as much about it as they would otherwise. And that's going to limit how able you are to support them. So gender identity and sexuality, sometimes, again, if it's not something that we ourselves have thought too much about, we can think, oh, it's just kind of like, this is just the way I am. It's just kind of, to be straight, for example, is some kind of default setting. And then to be not straight is like a, sexuality is something that happens to other people. It doesn't happen to me. But we all have a gender identity and we all have a sexuality. It's just that, if I am sort of born male, for example, and then, present to the world as a man, that's a very, very easy choice for me to make. In fact, it's so easy, I don't even need to think about that as being a choice. Whereas if somebody is born male and then feels like that actually isn't who they are, they transition to female, or they think that they are non-binary. And we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail later on. So don't worry if that you're like, at hearing that. If somebody, transitions in any form, then that is a choice, and that people notice, and people will describe it as a choice. And so just, I'm setting up that difference there just so that you can see that that applies really right across the spectrum of experiences for LGBT plus people. So big takeaway from this: if we can de-escalate our own experiences from the status of being normal, you'll walk into a conversation ready to hear a point of view that is maybe going to be radically different from your own, and you're going to be ready to not just shut it down out of hand. And equally, it's not going to threaten your own experience, because you're going to be like, well, this experience is me, and their experience is different, and that doesn't invalidate my own experience, and it doesn't invalidate theirs. So everything can be just on a level playing field from the start. So, okay, that's great. I've got a mindset to go into my conversation with, but how do I actually get started? Now, some of this might feel quite obvious. You might think, oh, this is what I would have done anyway, in which case that's a really good sign. But again, it's thinking about making space for the young person to be the expert on their experience, you know, to let them tell you how they feel, rather than maybe asking questions which, oh, do you feel like this? A question like, do you feel like this, or are you upset, for example, it's, you know, you're narrowing the conversation down there. A really good way to open up a conversation is to ask a question with a kind of open word at the start, such as what, how, or why. How was your day? You know, if they maybe say something that you're, you know, about, you know, a friend's maybe said something to them that upset them. Why was that? You know, how did that make you feel? Questions like this. Sometimes we can feel like we need to give like a response, like a comment, but actually often if we ask a question, you know, that's just going to open the floodgates, and somebody is going to really come forward with their experience, and then we can understand, and we can listen to understand, rather than maybe listening to reply. And I think that's a really important point to a conversation. Sometimes when we watch films, we see like a parent giving some kind of amazing speech that makes their child feel really loved. You know, I'm thinking here, I don't know if anybody's seen the film Love, Simon, and Jennifer Garner's got this wonderful speech in it where she kind of makes him feel really loved, and he's just come out, and it's wonderful. But that's a Hollywood film, right? You know, there's a degree of that's been written by a bunch of people, you know. That's not really how it's going to play out in real life. So don't feel any pressure to say some amazing thing. I think just making space for your kid to talk about their experiences, or for any young person that you're engaging with to talk, by asking open questions, that's far more important than having any sort of profound nugget of wisdom. Of course, if you think of one, you know, and you think, oh, this could really help for them to hear this, but I think more important is just making that space. And so you can make these more specific as well. So it doesn't just have to be a really like open-ended question, but, you know, as I was sort of saying before, you might want to build off the back of something that they've just said, when they've maybe, you know, told you about something that's happened that day, or maybe they said something like a few days ago and you've been meaning to pick up on it, or there's something that's made you think like, oh, like I wonder if there's something going on with sort of sexuality or gender with my child. You know, oh, when you said that, you know, could you explain what you meant by that? You know, that sort of thing. Taking an interest can go a long way. And yes, listen to understand. So listen to their answers without interrupting. You know, let them come to a natural stop. And you know, I know that, you know, sometimes there may not be time, but, you know, these conversations can be really, really important. And if you're able to make that time to have them, and to let your child speak for, you know, as I say, until they're finished, rather than us maybe thinking, oh, I thought of a really, you know, nice thing to say, or, you know, let them come to a halt and then think, right, okay, what do I have to say now? That's a really good way to foster a conversation on this subject, and on many other subjects as well. And yeah, where you don't understand, ask questions to get clarification. You know, I said before, avoid kind of making statements, or maybe responding with what something immediately makes you think or feel. If we are like, I don't understand that, you know, rather than saying, oh, I don't understand that, we might say like, oh, could you explain a bit more about that to me? Or I'm not sure where you're coming from with that, you know, would you mind and it's this part that I don't get. You know, bringing that specificity will help. So yes, as much as we can maybe park emotional reactions and just in the first instance understand what a young person is saying to us, that's really going to help us in a conversation that we're having, maybe where a kid is coming out to you, or you know, just making space for that to happen. If the conversation is slow and you feel like there is something there that needs to be addressed, and you know, continue asking open questions, but equally it might just be that it's better to have the conversation at another time, and that's okay too. If they don't want to talk at that particular point in time, or you know, you're asking questions like, oh, you know, how do you feel about this? And you're getting like one word answers, or you know, like, oh, I don't want to talk about it. Don't feel like you need to force that. They will, if you're regularly asking, how was your day? How are things going? What's, you know, what's up here? They will come forward at a given point. Just even speaking from personal experiences there, you know, the times when me and my folks weren't talking about the things I was going through when I was a teenager, with regards to coming out, that was often because we weren't having conversations about, you know, even much, you know. It was because those how was your day conversations, you know, and oh, like, tell me more about that, that wasn't happening. It wasn't because of some sort of major issue. It's just because people were busy and, you know, ships in the night. So I think if you're making the effort to ask those questions, and then that's going to go a long way. So even if they don't want to speak, you know, remind them they can come and speak to you about it any time that they like, and they'll come forward when they're ready. Okay, so starting a conversation. We talked about going in with leaving our normal at the door, going in with that mindset, and asking open questions, and then respecting boundaries if we don't want to speak. 3 key points to think about for starting a conversation. As for answering questions, so yeah, the conversation starts and you might get questions, you might get asked different bits and pieces, and you might think, oh yikes, now I've got to sound like an expert. Oops. Well, you don't have to sound like an expert. If you don't know, that is okay. You don't have to come across as like being there and done it to the young person. But the thing to remember is that you can always find out. Especially with teenagers, it might, you know, it might even be fun to Google the question that they've got together. It's, you know, especially if it's like a sexual question and you're maybe like, ooh, I'm very nervous talking about this. There are amazing resources out there that, you know, charities like ourselves put out, or I mean, loads of Scottish charities put out, and all kinds of different organizations. And there's you know, so there's no reason why a lack of information should be an issue. But nor is there a pressure on you to become an expert in, you know, if your child, for example, is trans and you're not trans, you know, no matter how much reading you do, you're never going to understand exactly kind of how that feels for them, because it doesn't map onto your own experience. So, you know, help them, connect them to communities and find that information, and that's just as important or more important than knowing the answer right away. There's no pressure on you to have that information to hand. It's more just about how you react when you don't know, and you know, I don't know, let's find out is a good way to come at that. But yes, try and make sure if you are doing things like Googling, you know, you're getting your information from trusted sources. So charities like, yeah, Four Pillars, Stonewall Scotland, and LGBT Youth Scotland are great places to start. All got amazing resources. You know, we're here to support on a localized level, but the Scotland-wide organizations have like more in the a way of like written materials for you to maybe go through, and like videos and things like that, and that you can engage with. Because yeah, this experience is theirs, right? And that's a point that I've made a couple of times now. So this, as I say, that's got two parts to it. It's kind of got, you've got to let them explain to you what that experience is, and also if they're asking you questions, you may not always feel hugely qualified to be able to give an answer, and that's okay. That doesn't mean the conversation has to shut down or stop. You know the it can very much continue, but it's just about not putting that pressure on yourself. And I think that when you find that you do that, that will open up for the conversation and allow it to carry on. So when a young person is coming out, that's going to be a very hard moment for them, or it might not be, and that's obviously the ideal. But a lot of times it can be a process that involves a bit of tension, and let's just remember that's not about you. It's not a reflection on you. They're discovering their gender identity and sexuality. Everybody is doing that, particularly in their teens, during puberty, and sometimes even earlier than that. And maybe they're still kind of very early in that journey. They might not have the answers themselves on how they feel or what their experience is, in which case it's even more important that they've got that support around. So yeah, ask the young person how you can best support them. That's a really good one. It's just, right, okay, how can I help? Right, especially if you feel like, I just don't know what to do. That's all right. That's okay to ask that question, and it's very likely that they'll be able to give you a sense of the sort of support that they would like. Yeah, accept the language that they use to describe their experiences and feelings. So this is where they're the expert on their experience. Young people have got so much to learn about the world, and you may feel in some ways they're quite young and naive. But when it comes to their experiences and when it comes to how they feel, nobody is ever going to know that better than they do. And contradicting them or challenging them on particular points, oh, are you sure this isn't just a phase, for example, not helpful. That's we want to kind of just accept almost what they say rather than challenging it. And if that is a part of a longer journey, they will realize that on their own without being challenged, because at the end of the day, they'll just want to be happy and to feel comfortable and at peace within themselves. They don't want to be in turmoil or figuring things out or unsure. And so it's in their best interests to come up with the most accurate language and to describe their experiences as best they can. And so they will do that on their own, and we don't need to give them the language or say, oh, are you sure? That sounds new and I've not heard of that before. That's, as I say, not going to help. And it may even be something like they come down the stairs one day dressed in a way that you never would dress yourself. And again, the best thing that you can often do is roll with this the best that you can. They'll be very, very happy to have you with them on the journey. That's, I think, knowing that your parent is really supportive through that time is amazing, and it's going to really help your child come and feel like they can explore things and really figure themselves out, and not have to wait. Often, a lot of times, what happens with LGBT plus young people is that self-exploration and self-discovery is kind of put off until they leave home, and it can be late teens, early 20s, mid-20s, 30s when people are figuring things out about themselves. And the more that you can roll with what they tell you about their experiences, the more that's going to happen when they're younger. Avoid discouraging them from like, oh, you don't need to put a label on it. That's another pretty unhelpful observation. And yes, celebrate this as a positive moment. If your child or a young person you're engaging with is talking to you openly about their gender identity and sexuality, that is a great sign. That means that you've put in great work to have an authentic relationship with them. They're not saying fine to you and talking about how they actually feel with their friends. you know, if they're speaking to you about it, that's a really, really good thing. In our society, we're often encouraged to think of sexuality and gender as simple things that don't need to be explored or talked about in detail. But this is generally, I would say, a bit of a fib. And it's something that we all need to figure out. And as I said before, because to be straight, to stay within the gender that is assigned to you at birth, these are really easy decisions to make. We don't think of those as decisions, but everybody has to kind of make those calls. And it's a cause to celebrate when somebody figures it out. And internalized homophobia is a point I would make here as well. You know, I wouldn't just assume that because somebody is LGBT plus, even if, you know, you're encountering somebody who is already out, you know, they're free from holding discriminatory beliefs about themselves or others like them, because often, you know, if people are existing in environments that aren't supportive, they will internalize that or they'll adapt themselves. So, for example, when I was coming out as gay at school, you know, I used to say, "Oh, but I'm not one of those gay men who like defines themselves by their sexuality." And my straight friends loved this. They loved it so much. They loved the fact, oh yeah, Darryl's gay, but it's like not the only thing about him. He's still him. Whereas what that really meant was Darryl's gay, but he's still dressing and behaving as a straight person does, which is a very lonely place for Darryl to be very often, you know. And that, so I think, you know, that's a way in which somebody may appear to be fine, but actually what's going on underneath is kind of a bit of internalized homophobia. And so talking about leaving normal at the door, making space for others to describe their experiences, that's really going to prevent this from happening, you know? Because we don't want to get to a situation where maybe attitudes that we've expressed around somebody, you know, they've taken that in and they start to believe that about themselves. Even if somebody doesn't look like they have that, it's a real danger. Okay, and yes, being there as well, you know, if they're experiencing bullying or something at school, you know, it's much more likely to come out as well if we use some of the tools that we talked about before. And I've made this point a couple of times as well. Everybody has a gender identity and sexuality, right? Sometimes we can think only LGBT plus people think about these things. And as I've said, you know, everybody has to go through this process, but we do just live in a society where some identities are more normalized than others, and indeed so normalized that we don't even think of them as identities. I think sometimes LGBT plus people, for example, advocating for equality can be, oh, you know, identity politics. But of course, everybody, you know, has an identity. As I say, it's just that some are a little bit more normalized than others. So, some relevant language. Now, this is going to be quite a quick fire term. I'm noticing we're just sort of coming up to the 30-minute mark just now. So, what I would say is, do not feel like, you know, this isn't like a checklist that you need to remember all of the terms. But it is going to just give you a bit of a brief introduction to some of the words that you may hear young people using in connection to gender identity and sexuality. And the idea isn't here that you remember every single word that comes up, but you know, you'll have heard of it and you can explore it later if you'd like, or when you hear a young person using it, it won't be the first time. And also, I think, again, the mindset is more important, you know, leaving normal at the door. You know, because again, there will be terms that I've used here. You know, I can't get across all of the terms that somebody will use to describe their experience. And indeed, you know, I'm sort of a 27. You know, so the words that a 7-year-old uses to describe the sexual orientation or gender identity are going to be different, and they're drawing from different frames of reference. So, sexual orientation. Very simply, what we mean by that is the way in which a person describes how they are attracted to other people. So some words that we might hear in connection to that: lesbian, gay, Bisexual, very likely that we've come across these and that we understand these. Queer is a term, you know, especially if you're a little bit older, you might have heard that as being like a slur in the past. At the moment, I would say, particularly among young people, if you're hearing that word used, it's not as an insult. It is really like an overarching term just to signify that somebody isn't heterosexual, but it's like an umbrella word. So somebody could say they're queer and they might identify as gay, or they might be bisexual, but queer is just like a word that is more of an umbrella term. Asexual is generally people who don't experience sexual attraction towards others. That doesn't mean they don't have feelings for other people, but you may come across that. Pansexual generally refers to people who are attracted to all gender identities, and curious is somebody who may be just exploring new experiences with regard to sexuality, but doesn't have a clearer word on that. Now, all of these words are very much, you know, they don't describe the complexity of like an individual's experience. So these are never perfect. That's not a reason not to use them. It is a reason just to understand that, you know, that they, you know, it doesn't just stop with the word, you know, oh, okay, now I understand. You know, it's going to, you know, different people may use the words in slightly different ways. And it's really important to just, as I said before, you know, ask those open questions to understand your child or young person's experience. Gender identity. So the gender that a person identifies as is what we mean when we say gender identity. And it's not the same as an assigned sex. So which is given at birth. So at birth, the doctors look at the genitalia of a child, and generally then name male or female, right? And of course, then as a child begins to kind of get older, they may not feel that that is correct. And that's again just where that comes to letting a person be the expert on their own experience, right? And we might think again there when it comes to that, oh well, it's only like a minority of people. But you know, again, just to remember that we live in a society where it's so easy to just roll with that's sort of assigned sex and be like, okay, that's my gender. It's much harder. And it involves often a lot of sort of complicated things with relationships to transition. So associated words you might hear: transgender is an umbrella term that would describe anybody whose gender identity doesn't match the sex that they were assigned at birth. And trans would be an abbreviation of transgender. Non-binary would describe somebody whose gender identity is neither male nor female. Okay, and again, that can be an umbrella term, but neither male nor female is what that refers to. Intersex describes people who at birth had characteristics of both the male and female sex. And cisgender refers to somebody whose gender identity matches their sex that's assigned at birth. Transition is the word that is given to the process where somebody goes from an assigned sex to a gender. A transition can take many different forms. It might involve the NHS. It may simply involve, like social things. It might involve changing of clothes. It's something that will look different for different people. Two-spirit is one that you'll come across much less often, I would say. So I'm not going to go into that just now, just looking at time. Pronouns. A point on pronouns. A young person will not always use the gender pronouns that they've been that have been used with them in the past. And if somebody transitions from male to female or female to male, they'll use the pronouns of the gender that they've arrived at. So he, him, or she, her. However, if somebody is, we talked about non-binary people, you know, neither male nor female, they will generally use the pronouns they, them. Okay, and that can sometimes be, if we've never met a non-binary person before and we're encountering one for the first time, that can sometimes be something that, you know, it takes us a minute to get our head around, and we may slip up, and that's okay. I would, you know, really encourage you not to get worried or defensive if that happens. Just, it happens. And again, the important thing is that mindset, coming back to what I was saying before, this is how somebody has told me they would like to be addressed, and I'm going to honor that. I'm not going to impose my ideas of how I think they should be addressed on top of that. I'm going to let them tell me what's right for them, because as we were saying earlier, they will know best. And yeah, if you're not sure, it's often best to ask, you know, do so respectfully. But you know, a trans person is going to be much happier if somebody asks them, "I'm sorry, can I just confirm which pronouns you'd like used?" than if somebody maybe assumes and gets it wrong, because that's going to reinforce for them that their transition maybe isn't valid, or that somebody hasn't seen that in them. Okay. Now, before we close, I'm just going to talk about what an LGBT plus charity does by going through some of the services that we offer at 4 Pillars. So our services, we offer a few different services that could support. So we run groups for, we run different kinds of groups, including one that is called Including Families, a support group for family members of LGBT plus people. So, you know, if you're thinking, oh, I'd like to have a regular network, that would be a great one to join. We've got one that's for teenagers as well. And there's a few different ones for like trans people. So have a look at our website. I'll be putting that up in a moment. If you feel like you or a young person would benefit from being part of a regular community. One-to-one services we offer as well, if that sort of peer support is needed. We have a drop-in service and practical advice available at our hub. We run training sessions like this, and we also offer assistance reporting a hate crime if somebody is concerned about going directly to the police. And that's something to bear in mind as well. You know, if your kid has an experience like that, you know, bullies at school, and it's really, you know, it's not just you're like, oh, that's you know, to me that sounds not legal. You know, do remember that you've got, you know, that's something that you can do, and support your child if you feel like that's an experience that they've had. This is our hub, which is open 10 to 6, Tuesday to Saturday. The drop-in service runs every day that we're open, so it's free to use anytime. And then groups generally run in the evenings after the hub is closed for the drop-in service. And that's on Regent Quay in Aberdeen. So just a short walk from the bus station. And yeah, as I say, available anytime at 10 to 6, that is. Okay, some contact information here for the charity as well. I mentioned our website a moment ago, and we've got an email address for any queries as well. We've got a phone number there, and we're also available across social media platforms at the handles that you'll see there, 4 Pillars UK, or we also organise or play a large role in organising Grampian Pride. And the address of the hub that we saw a moment ago is 33 Regent Quay. Okay. So that's us. That's me at the end of my talking part. And I'm going to open up to a Q&A in a moment. But before I do, let's recap what we've covered. So I started by talking about how to approach conversations with a young person about gender identity and sexuality. We talked about leaving normal at the door. We talked about letting them tell you what their experiences are, listening to understand. And then we talked about, if we're asked questions, how to answer those as well. So answering questions, we talked about, again, letting them be the expert on their experiences. And if we're not sure, we don't have to have all of those answers right away. Introduction to language. So there was quite a few different words and terms used there that you'll have come across. And as I say, no need for you to understand or to have taken in all of those meanings. It's a lot to take in. So just bear in mind that, that's maybe a launch pad to go forward from. And then awareness of support services. So I've talked about some of the services that we have at 4 Pillars there, and hopefully that'll be of use for you as well. Okay, that rounds up our recap. And I'd just like to open that up to a Q&A just now. So what we'll maybe do is stop the recording there. And if anybody does have any questions that they don't that they'd like to ask, then we'll take those just now.
Well, the questions have been coming through, and we've between just on the back end of you speaking, DJ and I have been just answering some. One of the questions that has been asked is, was there support for teens who are autistic and are trans? And DJ answered that by just saying that, yeah, you do provide a support group for teens, but and we've answered that in the chat. But one of the last questions that we have is, do you have to be a certain age to know if you're LGBT plus?
That is a great question. Thanks. The simple answer to this is no. I think that when we're talking about young people, sometimes we can get nervous that, oh my gosh, if my little boy starts wearing dresses at the age of 4 and starts telling me that he wants to be a woman, like, he's too young to know that. But as I said before, if that is the attitude that we respond to that with, then it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, to say, no, you're not, don't be silly, that's just what you put on when you're playing dress up. Then of course it's not, it's not bizarre then that kid maybe thinks, oh, I did just get that wrong. And that's where I'd encourage you to, with young people at whatever age, if they're still at 5 or 6, if they're beginning to speak about gender identity and sexuality, I would encourage those conversations. Don't feel like you need to shut them down. Oh, no, like, I just want my kids to kind of be normal like the others, like, let them talk about it. And the more that you talk about it, the more likely that they're going to come to be their authentic selves sooner, and that's really, really important. So yeah, a kid might be 5 and they might be very confident that they're a particular gender identity or sexuality. And I think the more that you can roll with that and, speak to them, kids can sometimes, I think, surprise us with how, if we speak to them like they're an adult and we treat their feelings as valid as we would treat an adult, rather than thinking, oh, they're just a little kid, they're not 100% sure what they're saying, that really they will rise to that level, and that they will tell us, often quite eloquently, about their experiences.
I just wanted to add in on that as well, because I know you mentioned about the trans children there, and yes, I know a lot of adults that tell me now that they knew from when they were 4 years old that they were trans, or that they were different to what they were assigned at birth. But also on the sexuality side of it, very young children, 9, 10, 11-year-olds, tend to kind of start knowing their sexuality. And it doesn't necessarily mean if a young, let's take the example, a young boy, if he turns around and says, I fancy other boys, or I'm attracted to other boys, don't panic. It doesn't mean that they're going to start going to have sex. with other people. It just means that they find that person attractive. Sexuality doesn't always mean sex. It just means they are attracted to the same sex. So don't panic. Have, as Darryl said, have open conversations and accept them for who they are. Work with them, talk with them, and get them the help and support they need.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, it is, again, drawing from personal experience here. I mean, my earliest feeling that I when I would say that I knew that I could, but obviously I didn't have the words for it then, would have been, 6 years old, and it was, another 10 years on until I came out, and coming out was a big old emotional hoo-ha with all kinds of implications with my parents and friends, and it doesn't need to be like that. And the only reason that these sort of coming out stories happen in those mid-teens is often because we live in an environment where there's not always space for kids who have that feeling when they're 6 that they don't have words for. I think they often pick up, and very young, that's a feeling they need to maybe hide. It's not safe for that feeling to be shown to others. So I think that's where it really comes down to your own mindset and setting a tone in the house that, you just tell me how you feel, and that's okay. I ain't going to judge. I'm not going to have a comment or try to snap you into a box that makes sense to me. That's really gonna let that happen without the major situations and the dramas, because you'll get plenty of them anyway with puberty, as I'm sure some of you are already experiencing. Oh, you're on mute there, Donna.
Beg your pardon. One last question is, and it relates back to the teen group. What is covered at the teen group, and is it a discussion, or is it speakers, or is it activities, or is it all of those?
It is all of those. So the teen group runs every other Friday. So it's not this Friday, but the first Friday in February or the next one, and then every 2 weeks thereafter. It does various things. So it's a wide range of ages that come. So it's all teenagers, so 13 to 19. Majority at the moment tend to be around 14, 15. It doesn't mean that anybody else can't come along. That's just how it happens at the moment. We basically just do activities. Last group, they made bracelets. We had somebody in from SHMU, which is Social Health Media Unit, talking about getting involved with volunteering and stuff, and media. We've got scheduled Sam H to come in and talk to young people about their mental health, and getting support around that as they're trying to find their own identities. And then we just hang out as well. So, Christmas, we had a huge party, a big buffet, loads of music. In fact, one of the young people themselves provided that music and done the DJ set, which I think was fantastic. And everyone loved it and had a good time. So yeah, pretty much all of it. It's just a good, nice, safe space for them to come and hang out, get some support each other. That's the main thing. They make friends, support each other, and just get on with it, basically. Just want to add, I know we haven't touched on it much. There's also a fairly new group, which is every Saturday morning, called the Breakfast Club. And the Breakfast Club is there and open to all families. So if you're supporting a young person or have a young person at the moment that is LGBT or thinks they may be LGBT, that want to get some advice and support or just meet other people, the Saturday Club is the one for that. So it's 10 till 2. It's called the Breakfast Club. It does have breakfast in it. We have breakfast available. We have little cereal things. So yeah, but that's a Saturday, and that's open for the whole family. So parents can actually come along, parents can meet other parents, and talk as well. And then obviously, because the children tend to be a lot younger, you're not leaving that child there. With the teen group, we do ask that the parents don't stay around, because obviously that we want the teens to be themselves, right? And we have people here to look after them. You're on mute again, Donna.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I think we just want to be aware of the time, so there isn't any other questions come up. So I would just really want to thank you for your input tonight. Just keeping just that key things, but keeping an open mind, making space for young people, exploring things together. There's been a lot of good takeaways for me as well tonight. Please fill in our evaluation. I've popped that into the link, and we'll just say good night and thank you very much for coming, and we'll get that posted on our Stronger Families tab on our Parent Learning Hub soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you everybody for attending, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, Donna.